Um, well, here we are again, and this again keeps on happening week after week, or every 2 weeks as we get together. Um, and in this case, not completely, but I could almost play the update from 2 weeks ago, and it's not going to be all that different. Just certain things. So let's start with the hostages, with the latest news in terms of the hostage negotiations. Depending on who you listen to, we're either have a complete pitzutz, the negotiations have blown up, or if you listen to the Egyptians, we're really close and just a little bit more to get there. What's the major problem? The major problem is Israel has demanded a list of the prisoners that are going to be included in this release as a number one. And Hamas basically says, well, we'll only let you know the day we release them like we did last time, which of course makes it very problematic because we don't really know how many people we're dealing with, how many are alive. And you really, at this point, can't wait, every evening to find out who's going to be released the next day. And you don't even know what you're negotiating over unless you know how many of them are alive and are going to be part of this deal. I think everybody agrees that that request is pretty minimal to know who you're negotiating for at this point. The second thing is Hamas has not agreed to, but it hasn't proposed anything else. The number of Palestinian prisoners who are going to be released in return for the hostages. And it's not clear. The Egyptians basically told the Hamas that Israel should pick the ones in terms of the heavy ones, the ones who have blood on their hands, which ones get released. Hamas has not answered to that. There's a basic question: does Hamas want an agreement at this point? There are those people who say that they do not want an agreement. They rather go into Ramadan and hope things blow up even more, that more events take place like the humanitarian disaster with the convoy a few days ago. That all works in their favor. And they think that Israel's getting into deeper and deeper trouble and they can just blast us out. Uh, it's, a, it's certainly a viable position to have. But again, we don't know what the status of Hamas is really, so we don't really know. Um, so it's not clear. Israel does want an agreement. It would like an agreement before Ramadan. It wants the agreement because A, it's not clear how much more we're going to accomplish at this point. B, we haven't found any other way of getting the hostages home. So if there's no other way, then this is the way to do it. At least some of them, the ones that are still alive. And C, because we're concerned about relations with the United States and other places as well. So Israel would like the agreement, but it's not clear that Hamas really wants the agreement. And so, I'm certainly happy I'm not, I mean, for many reasons, but you can imagine what the hostage families are going through. Hour by hour, day by day, we're very close, we're very close, very close. Oh, no, we're not going to have an agreement anytime soon. And that's where we stand. I mean, the question becomes, what is Sinwar's advantage in coming to an agreement right now? Well, number one, the people of Gaza would like to see, at least 30 or 45 days of ceasefire. And number two, I would imagine and these people need to come out of the tunnels a little bit and do the things, to have a more reasonable Ramadan for them. Let's put it that way. I wouldn't even hazard a guess whether or not we're going to end up with an agreement in the next week. Any attempt at forecasting what's been going on here, prophetizing, would have been a mistake all along, and it's certainly now where we stand now, a mistake to think we know what is likely to happen. On the ground, theoretically in Khan Yunis, the IDF attacked the one major neighborhood, and a neighborhood that's on the western side, a little bit north of Khan Yunis, that they bypassed when they went into Khan Yunis. So theoretically, once they finished this neighborhood, they've now completed the above ground cleansing of Khan Yunis. It's not quite clear even now how much there is below ground, and what part that will play. let's put it this way. I mean, for the last 3 weeks, those of us listening to Israeli media have been hearing it's another day or two in Khan Yunis. That's obviously not been the case. There are also not a lot of troops left in Khan Yunis. We pulled off an awful lot of troops. And there was a lot of reasons to release the reserve troops. There were a lot of reasons, of course, obviously to pull the paratroopers who've been in for so long. But it doesn't increase our capabilities, let's put it that way. And we have this overriding problem that's not only in this situation, we just don't have enough troops. And we don't have enough troops to finish the job off in an efficient way. We don't have enough troops to quote unquote occupy or provide humanitarian aid or all the things that we need to do. Leaving aside the ideological problems that this government might have in doing it, it's also very difficult on the ground to have the troops to do it. There's further the problem that, I'm going to switch now to the issue of humanitarian aid for a moment. There are three levels of problems when it comes to humanitarian aid. Number one, the method that was being used until now, which was basically coming in from the south, and basically Hamas took most of the aid that was coming and either used it for themselves or resold it on the black market, so it didn't get to millions of people. Number two, these random airdrops. It's also very, very random. Who gets it? Who can get there quicker? It's not a very efficient way of distributing aid. And we had this system we were trying, which was to bring it into the north and make deals with local chamulat, local family organizations, and they would distribute it. But then we saw what happened on Thursday night, and that obviously didn't work out all that well, to say the least. Part of the problem is, like everything else that's gone on in this war, a lack of planning. In other words, it was quite clear, it didn't require a genius to know that there was going to be a humanitarian crisis after we did how we fought this war in Gaza. And the fact that there was going to be a humanitarian crisis could have been avoided if we had thought about it throughout and operated accordingly and created corridors, created systems, done things to make sure that there would not be a humanitarian crisis. But like I said, it's pretty much the story of this war for us. We've tended not to have a real plan. I mean, not talking now about a tactical battle plan that we have, and it seems to be working well. But we don't have a plan for what happens after our troops are there. We actually, believe it or not, didn't have a plan for conquering all of Gaza. That wasn't one of the options that the army had prepared for. It was considered so unlikely that no one bothered creating a plan. And unfortunately, as opposed to the American army that has, 100,000 plans, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but every scenario there's a plan for, including a war with Iceland. I mean, the Israeli army did not put the effort into plans that didn't seem likely. And this is one of the cases. So, we are where we are. We have operational control over 60, 70, 75% of Gaza, but that doesn't mean we've wiped out Hamas in all those places. One of the problems that exists, and nothing is changing relating to that, is the fact that we have not found all the tunnels. We found a lot of tunnels. We've blown up a lot of tunnels, but there are many, many more tunnels than we thought going into the war. And it's not at all clear that we've found all. I'm quite sure we have not found all of them. We found a lot. And then it becomes very difficult to say you've secured an area if there's a tunnel you don't know about, and Hamas people can come back in after you've secured the area. And that's particularly the case when you don't leave soldiers behind in the area. Now, soldiers behind both become targets, which is very problematic. And also, again, going back to what I said before, we don't have enough soldiers to do that. So we're sort of sitting in the middle here without good solutions. And of course, that brings me to the situation with the United States and Biden and the airdrop and all those things together. It goes back to what I said before in terms of a lack of a plan. Because we have a lack of a plan, it's impossible for us to give answers to the questions that the Biden administration keeps on asking, that everyone in the world keeps on asking. What is your plan for the day after? Having something that Bibi wrote down basically on a napkin as our plan, that really doesn't work well. And that's really the plan that we seem to have, and we don't have one. And politically, it's near impossible for Netanyahu to come up with a plan, because he has certain ministers whose plan basically is to resettle part of Gaza. And I don't know that they will ever sign off on a plan that doesn't include that, even as ridiculous as it seems at this point. So he can't afford to lose those ministers, because if he loses those ministers, particularly Ben-Gvir, he loses his government. And if he loses his government, it means there's an election. If there's an election, it means he loses. As people saw from yesterday's poll, he loses pretty big at this point. I mean, that's the understatement. So that's why he gave a speech. It was all about the fact, about the fact that we don't have, we can't go for elections because it'll be a win for Sinwar. And then again, we were relying on UNRWA, but we don't want to rely on UNRWA. We knew the problems of UNRWA even before we went in. Now the reality is we probably didn't know how bad it was, and that we didn't know that. We knew that UNRWA schools were teaching hatred, and we knew that some people in UNRWA were cooperating with Hamas. I don't think we knew how many UNRWA people were actually part of Hamas. But again, if you eliminate Hamas, which was a government entity, and you eliminate UNRWA because it's too much part of Hamas in a way, then who does what? How do you do these things? How do you distribute the food, etc.? On the other hand, I've seen people on Twitter say it's Israel's strategy to starve Gaza. And I almost laugh if it wasn't so sad. Israel has a strategy? Really? I mean, it's an absurd statement to say that it's Israel's strategy to starve Gaza, because that would require a real strategy. I think it's an atrocious strategy, but it's a strategy. But it isn't a strategy because we don't have a strategy. And that's inherently our problem, is we didn't have a strategy other than destroying Hamas. And now that we found that it's almost impossible to really destroy Hamas, even though the army said all along it would take a couple of years to actually destroy Hamas, but we're people who want things to happen quickly, and I think most people in Israel and most of the world too. I mean, that's part of the problem. No one anticipated that this war would go on for so long, and that Israel wouldn't have completely beaten Hamas over pushing 5 months in another 4 to 5 days. So Israelis have been surprised. I think the Biden administration has been surprised. I don't know the army's been surprised, but it is what it is, and we have not finished them off yet. We've just hurt them badly, but still just hurt them. And to finish them off completely may be impossible. I hope it's still possible, but it may be impossible. Then what do you do? What's the day after? What's it like? And that's really very, very problematic. I'll go to the north, and I'll go in a minute. I want to comment. I'm going to write about it a little bit tonight. The article in the New York Times that spoke about the future. David Grossman wrote this article. It was an excellent article that talked about the current situation. It talked really well about it, and it gave a good sense of what Israelis are feeling and all the dangers and everything else. And about 90% of the article I thought was right on, accurate, and everything else. And he felt the pain of everybody, and he understood the fears of everybody and the fears of a Palestinian state which Hamas would take over. But then in the end, he jumped to, but there's no choice, we need to set up a Palestinian state. Now, I understand him. I understand that we need hope, and the only solution to our conflict in my opinion, is a two-state solution. There is no other solution. Doesn't mean we can have that solution, but it's the only solution that exists. So if you're desperate for a solution, if you want a solution in your lifetime, then the only thing you can propose is a two-state solution. But I don't see where you're going to get this two-state solution. Who's going to be the other side? If there'll ever be a two-state solution, it'll require a Palestinian leader who can say to his people, there will be no right of return. We'll get money and compensation. You'll be able to come back to the Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza, and we'll build wonderful housing because the world in Israel or whatever will give money for that housing. But there'll be no return to these keys you've been holding for your great-grandparents for 75, 100 years practically. And when we get our state, that will be the end of the conflict. If somebody comes forth, is charismatic enough, has enough leadership to explain that to the Palestinian people and doesn't get killed by his own people, then there's a possibility of peace. But I don't see anyone on the current political horizon anywheres who has the ability to do that and is likely to do that. And without that, we're really pretty much stuck, and there's no chance of peace without someone saying that and Palestinians accepting that as a fact. The previous attempts at negotiations basically fell on those 2 points: the right of return and end of conflict. And those were the 2 things that the Palestinians were not willing to give up. And there's no reason for us to give up everything else unless we get those 2 things. So anything less than that, all it is, giving land for land and more peace later on. We had hoped the idea of Oslo was that a mini Palestinian state would slowly grow and we could live in peace with it. And the fact that we'd work together and there would be peace between the two states, so the rump of a state the Palestinians got to begin with as part of the Palestinian Authority, trust would grow, more people would buy in to a peaceful solution. That didn't happen, obviously. The Second Intifada was the single biggest cause of Israelis moving to the right and not believing in peace as a possibility. And we haven't gotten over that trauma. We certainly haven't gotten over the trauma of October 7th. So, I wish everyone well, and I too wish for a Palestinian state, but not until our most basic need is met. And that's what our most basic need really is. Okay, let's talk about Hezbollah up north. I think it's very clear at this point. I think it's very clear at this point that Hezbollah does not want to go to war. If it wanted to go to war, it would have responded much more vigorously to some of our actions outside the immediate area of the border, and with us killing some of its senior people. It does not want a war, and so I don't think there'll be one in the near term. Of course, anything can happen. A mistake. We have a bombing that accidentally kills a large number of Lebanese children or women or who knows what, totally by accident. One of their missiles or rockets hits in a place where there's a school bus, and God forbid, dozens of Israeli children are killed for one of their rockets. Anything like that were to take place, all bets would be off, and we could end up in a hot war up north without even wanting it. However, in the meantime, the only people who are going to really want to go to war will be us, because we can't remain in a situation where the north is under attack. I believe that we are slowly pushing Hezbollah back. I believe our attacks have been successful. We've expanded them. The number of attacks that Hezbollah has launched against us have been going down in the last few days. Will it be enough? Will we be able to push them back militarily? I don't know. Will we be able to reach some sort of political agreement? I hope so. But you just never know. We have 100,000 people not living in their homes along the northern border. We've had villages and settlements, I mean kibbutzim and moshavim, all of which have been heavily, heavily damaged by Hezbollah rockets. And those include, both Shlomi and Kiryat Shmona being the 2 cities on the border, and like I said, a list of kibbutzim that are along the border and moshavim. We obviously can't allow this to continue forever. On the other hand, we don't want a war. We just don't want a war now, in any case. We don't want a war until we're ready. We're not ready at the moment. we're not ready economically for missiles landing on Tel Aviv, which might overwhelm our missile defense system. We're not ready for assault. The plan of battle vis-a-vis a war with Hezbollah includes us landing basically just south of Beirut and cutting across deep into Lebanon to reach their missile sites. That's a big maneuver that requires time and effort and requires an army that's ready. Our equipment has been damaged during this war. Everything needs to be redone, re-equipped, all those things that are required. So I don't see that happening for a number of months. I think the information that was leaked, I guess, so whoever did it from the United States to CNN, I guess was 4 or 5 days ago, that Israel would plan, if there was no agreement on the north, an attack on Lebanon in the late spring or early summer. That seems somewhat reasonable to me. But again, maybe there will be an agreement. I don't know. So we'll see with that. I see someone commented there about the fact that I'm understating the influence of Saudi Arabia on the Palestinians, and I don't think so. First of all, the Iranians, if the Saudis don't want to support them, which they haven't been supporting them, by the way, in the last, probably almost in a decade, they haven't really given support to Palestinians. But the Iranians certainly are not a moderating influence, and it's not in the Iranian interest for Israel and the Palestinians to reach an agreement, because that eliminates one of the major points of argument, both within their own people and in the rest of the Arab world, if there is no Palestinian problem. So I don't see that as a major issue. Houthis, talk about briefly. We know a ship went down yesterday. It sunk yesterday. It was hit last week. The United States and the UK and a whole long list, of other countries have all been attacking the Houthi sites with mixed results. Obviously, the Houthis are pretty good at hiding a lot of their weapons. We saw in the previous Gaza wars that we were never able to stop the rocket fire, and also from the Lebanon war, from airstrikes. It decreased it a little bit, but we were never able to stop it. The only reason rockets have almost stopped, not completely, but almost stopped in Gaza now, is because we're physically there. And we physically destroyed thousands of rockets. And we basically destroyed, it looks like, their main facilities for making rockets. So you need troops on the ground really to do these sort of things. Doing it from the air never really works. Air power is very important as a support to ground troops. They don't replace ground troops, I'm afraid, in any situation. Only maybe in the Kosovo War was air attacks successful, but that was also because Serbia had a real city and no defense. So we were able to hurt the Americans, and the NATO was able to hurt Serbia enough that it was effective. Lastly, go back to the U.S. and Israel. So talking domestic politics a little bit and trying to figure out how much of the actions and attempted some pressure on Israel is related to Biden's concern about Michigan and any other place. It's basically Michigan that he's concerned with. I think it's there. I think it's real, but I don't think it's overwhelming. I am of the belief that, first of all, if this was September or October of next year, I think it would be very significant. But I'm going to assume, although we don't know when this is going to end, this will end sometime this spring. 4 or 5 months later, the issue will have faded to Arab Americans in Michigan, when they listen to all the anti-Arab rhetoric that'll be coming out of President Trump's mouth. I think they'll go home to the Democrats in the end. That's the more likely political scenario. Might not, but I think that's the more likely scenario. Of course, they're always worried, and of course, if they can do things that will help, like sending and parachuting an aid that doesn't hurt, but will help. That's why that's done to some extent, and to show the United States cares without changing too much up. So that's where I think we stand with that. Lastly, Israeli domestic politics, and it also ties into America. Former Defense Minister Gantz flew to the United States today or last night to meet with members of the administration. Netanyahu was in a fit about it. There's only one prime minister, and he didn't get his permission. The Americans asked to meet with Gantz. Gantz obviously couldn't say no, and Gantz doesn't work for Netanyahu. Also, we have a coalition government. The prime minister is not the king in coalition governments. He's a first amongst equals, and certainly in this particular case, where in every single poll, Gantz is getting more than twice the number of votes that Netanyahu is getting. Very difficult for Netanyahu to do anything. In a different world, he would have fired Gantz. But in this world, if he fires Gantz, there'll be 1 million people in the streets tomorrow night. It'll make the firing of Gallant look like a minor event compared to what would happen if he fired Gantz at the moment. So Gantz will continue to be the alternative prime minister, and that's the reality of who he is at the moment. He's also the person that the Americans are willing to talk to. Nobody is willing to talk to Bibi because no one trusts Bibi. That's the reality. It's throughout the world. Look at every comment that every world leader has made about Bibi in the last 5 years, and basically no one trusts him because he never keeps his word when it comes to anything. Neither does any Israeli politician, to be honest with you. So that's where we stand with that. Okay, we're just about at the halfway mark. At this point, I guess we'll turn over to questions. So just whatever you do, the wave or whatever, and hopefully I'll see it. If I don't see it, Amy will see it and tell me. So. Gary.
Thank you, Mark. Just in following along what the military has been doing and their quote goal of eliminating Hamas, have you accumulated metrics on how many kilometers of tunnels we've destroyed, day by day, to see if there's progress? And also, we've always finding that there are more tunnels than we anticipated. So in parallel to that, today we think there are this many tunnels undiscovered, and in a week we'll find some more until we revise those estimates. So it'd be interesting to see a chart of what we have literally destroyed versus what our estimates have been at those same time periods.
Well, I'm quite sure some ways in the Army they have that, but they are not sharing it with the public in any which way. So we as a public, we do not know. As journalists, we do not know. They're not sharing that information. And if someone got a hold of it, I guarantee you the censor would censor it. There is a censor in this country, and anything that you publicize, anything that Israeli media publicizes has to go through the censor. And so I don't think it certainly wouldn't go through this, past the censor. Sometimes the reason you see a lot of these articles in the Wall Street Journal, we don't see them in the Israeli publications, is someone in the government wants to leak certain information, and when the Wall Street Journal publishes it, it doesn't go through the censor. So my answer is I simply have no idea. I'm sure somebody has a good idea, but don't know. Let me just put it this way: it's not as much as we'd like. That much I'm pretty sure of.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It's usually, excuse me just a moment. Okay. It's winning the hearts and minds of the people of Gaza. And I'm wondering, I never see on American broadcasting anyone putting the microphone to the average citizen who's wailing and asking them, would you live in peace with the Jews? Do you believe that a number or a substantial number of the citizens of Gaza themselves would accept living with the Jews next door? Or do you believe that if Hamas gave any boy of 16 a rifle, he'd be willing to commit suicide just to kill an Israeli soldier?
Okay, I wouldn't go to either extreme, let's put it that way. I believe that the majority of Gazans, at least at this moment, wouldn't be happy to live at peace with us. Even look, let's look at it in two levels. They have been brought up now 3-4 generations. Most of them in Gaza are all refugees, quote unquote. They all descended from people who left and arrived in Gaza in 1949. They have been brought up for generations being told that their land, their house is somewhere, you know, in Yaffo or in some village that doesn't exist anymore. They believe that. None of them, let me put it this way. If the students at Harvard University who were chanting from the river to the sea do not know the fact that the Palestinians were many times offered a state of their own, all they had to do was accept it, do you think the Palestinians in Gaza know that? You know, they certainly would think it's fake news, to say the least. So they don't believe that. They believe that an oppressor named Israel has been oppressing them all these years. While we were in Gaza, we had troops in there and we were in occupation. And now that we're out of Gaza, all of their economic problems are all caused by our blockade, quote unquote. We won't get into the fact that the blockade only exists because they were firing rockets at us, but leave that part aside. Some of them have been, you know, some of them have been treated in our hospitals. Some of them have had jobs in working on construction or whatever else in our cities. But I don't think any of that created a love of us. I also don't think, and again, I don't think it would have solved the problem, but I believe it would improve things, at least at the edges. We ever made enough of an attempt of outreach, of trying to do good things for the children of Gaza, for the sake of argument, or the children of West Bank, whatever it might be. We don't do that. We don't do things proactively. And I think that's a problem. I don't think it would solve the problem. Don't forget, the problem is based on the historic claims, on the wanting for that land that they haven't had in 3 generations, on education, and of course the religious aspect, which we cannot ignore. We try to ignore, but we cannot ignore the whole religious aspect of, you know, Jews controlling the Holy Land to the Muslims as well as to the Jews and the Christians. So all of those things are there. But I am a strong believer and you need to at least work at the edges. Maybe you won't solve it. Maybe it won't change anything. But maybe if we worked at the edges, if we work with young children, if we did good things for the young children, maybe in the next generation, like one of those young children will grow up and be that leader who we're looking for to bring about peace. But if we don't do any of it, why in the world would they want to want to live in peace with us? Just because they don't want to be killed, that's one way of looking at it. You know, we live in the Middle East. If we kill enough of them, the people will be scared and they'll just accept us. Hasn't worked until now. Let's put it that way. Certainly not the Palestinians. Let's work with the rest of the Arabs, and they will come to, you know, all the Arabs are willing to live in peace with us. But the Palestinians, all the rest of the Arabs don't have any real issues with us. But the Palestinians do. They have land they want back, which they're never going to get. So, Abby.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure, follow up. Go ahead.
Is the West Bank situation any different, or how different from the Gaza situation?
Okay, we need to separate out. The West Bank situation is better and worse simultaneously. Better in the sense that at least up until the war, and since then it's stopped, and that's a big problem. A very high number of Palestinians who live in the West Bank were working in Israel every day. And there were Israeli high-tech companies that even had engineers that were coming in, and some Israeli high-tech companies opened up offices in near Ramallah and things like that. So their situation was much better. Much worse because of the settlements that have been creeping in different parts of the West Bank, and the fact that some of the settlers are not exactly friendly, let's put it that way. So it's a mix. But again, you know, we haven't done anything to really reach out and try to improve things. I keep on throwing out a crazy idea of creating a beach taking a kilometer of our coast somewhere, fencing it off, and putting a beach there, and allowing and creating buses that would be guarded, etc., every day, bringing children and everything else from the West Bank to go to the beach. Most of the children in the West Bank have never seen the water. I mean, these are small things, and they will bring about peace. But again, we need to do these things. In other words, look, I'm not, I don't have rose-colored glasses. I don't believe that we can reach peace anytime soon. But I think we need to take steps that we can, whenever we can, to change the trajectory. The Titanic can't turn on a dime, but maybe we make little changes now. Maybe in 6 years, 10 years, 20 years, things will be better. That's always been my view. But we also have had governments, not only this government, but generally speaking, we have governments that don't think for the long term, except when it comes to water. It seems we do a good job thinking long term in terms of water, but in political matters, we don't think long term. Okay, Abby.
Yeah, first, I really appreciate your words, work at the edges. That's really helpful to me. So I'm interested in the two-state solution that you brought up, and I have two questions about it. First of all, is there another player that could come in and head up that Palestinian leadership that you're talking about in terms of another country, another, you hear a lot of talk about that, and I'm wondering if there's any other options. Secondly, I've heard talk about putting a buffer zone in between for the two-state solution, and I wondered if you know anything more about that. So those are my two questions.
Okay, so the buffer zone is really relating to Gaza, and putting an area in Gaza where we're not going to allow the Palestinians to be, and therefore that would create that buffer zone. Look, you can't have an external force a two-state solution. In other words, you have to have someone internally in the Palestinians that impacts them and convinces the people of Palestine, so to speak, that this is it. Whatever the agreement is, this is the agreement. This is the end of conflict. We have no further claims on the state of Israel. We have no further claims in any which way, and we will live in peace from here on in, and in return, we'll have a state of our own. We have not seen that, and therein lies the problem. So I don't really know, the way around that. So I don't see an external force. I mean, what sort of an external force can create? We don't want an external force in terms of a buffer, because that will stop us from doing what we need to do. So that's why I'm so pessimistic. I mean, I don't see a good solution. I don't see a good way. Until the day that the Palestinians decide they're ready to live in peace with us. And, like I've said, I don't know that we do enough to make that day happen, but they're really the key players to bring about peace more than anything else. And, like I said, we're not helping it any which way. Michael Ross.
Hi. Didn't Netanyahu say that unless the hostages are released tomorrow, he was going to start the invasion of Rafah? So
okay, he didn't quite say tomorrow. He said if the hostages are not released, he's going to, plans will go ahead. The army's not about to invade Rafah tomorrow or the next day or probably the next week. They're more likely to go into the camps in central Gaza first, which we did not clear. It's easier. There are less problems. It doesn't have all the refugees there. And there are serious Hamas targets still left there. So I would think they'll go first for the camps in central Gaza. We don't have a solution to the refugees, right? In other words, we talk about it, that we have a method of what are we going to do with them? Where are they going to go? We promised the United States and everyone else that we would find some sort of solution. I have not heard anyone come up with any reasonable solution that's likely to work. So before we have to first come up with that solution. So I would not expect we're going to go into Rafah anytime soon. And I'm assuming that most of the hostages that are alive are probably in Rafah at this point. I don't believe they've been sitting under Khan Yunis waiting for us to discover the tunnel which we haven't found.
okay, so what's the effect of Ramadan then?
I think the effect of Ramadan. How do you look at the effect of Ramadan? Ramadan, I think I think Hamas wants to use Ramadan and say, you know, look what the Israelis are doing on Ramadan, our holy month, etc., etc. I mean, I saw a ridiculous tweet a couple of days ago that said, you know, they're willing to attack on Ramadan if they would, if Israel had a no, if the Arabs had attacked Israel on a holy day, the whole world would be up in arms. Excuse me? You know,
Yeah.
the two surprise attacks on us took place on our holy days, on Yom Kippur and on Simchat Torah. So that seems to me a very specious argument, to say the least. We have to be worried, not so much because we don't want to violate Ramadan, but we don't want to use Ramadan as an excuse to get everyone riled up even more and make this much more into a pan-Arab conflict than it is just between us and Hamas and the Palestinians.
So what do you predict? Do you think Israel will ignore Ramadan or not ignore Ramadan?
I think it'll ignore Ramadan mostly. I mean, I don't think it'll attack. I don't think it'll attack Rafiah during Ramadan. Again, for the reasons that I said, because we're not ready to attack Rafiah, we'll attack the central camps. I mean, listen, people don't, you know, the insanity of the whole discussions is that if people, I haven't heard one of these people talking about the ceasefire and stop all the killing. It would all end if Hamas surrendered, agreed to go into exile, and released our hostages. We'd stop firing. That would be the end of it. But do you hear one chant anywhere in the world to Hamas to release all the hostages and surrender? To avoid additional civilian casualties? We'll be happy to surrender and we'll be happy to move to Tunisia or wherever the hell they want to go to. Have you seen one protest that says that?
No, I think we all agree with you. But so
I know
but
we
what you're
agree with
saying-
ourselves, but that's not the point.
Yeah, but so it's going to be another 6 weeks then before we think about going into Rafah.
My guess. I mean, I don't know exactly. I'm not sure, you know, what the state of the IDF is and the preparedness, etc. I also think if we go into, you know, look, there are two ways of going to Rafah. One, figuring out a way of dealing with all the refugees there, and that'll be a very clear move. We'll know, you know, the Hamas will know exactly when we're coming and everything else. One of the problems in this war has been we've telegraphed every one of our moves, except when we moved into Gaza, into Khan Yunis, we telegraphed all of our moves. So it's no big surprise that when we got somewhere, there weren't any hostages left because they knew we were coming. So if we do that and telegraph our moves to Rafah, then we probably won't be very successful, at least in terms of the hostages. If we don't telegraph our moves and do something in a surprise, we run into the problem of what happens with all these refugees. So I don't know the answer. I think it'll be 5 or 6 weeks at the earliest until we do that. But I don't know. I don't know. Tamara.
Okay, thanks.
Tamara? Yes.
Hi,
Not?
sorry about
Go
that.
ahead.
Thank you. I'll echo the appreciation that was provided earlier for all the information that you've been sharing with us all these months. And I wanted to pick up as well on the notion of working on the edges, because I agree, and yet I also think, from what I know, is that a lot of people have been doing that. Particularly from the Israeli side and the Jewish Israeli side, but the risks for Palestinians to take up those offers are great by their own, and clearly the risks have been detrimental to Jewish Israelis and others in Israel. Because a lot of the people who were slaughtered on the 7th were people who were active on the so-called edges. So I'm trying to figure out, because I know that there are people that, you know, there's a school that, the name escapes me now, but there's a school that works with Jewish and Palestinians in Israel. There are, you know, constant efforts among those of us who are progressive to try and reach over and bring people together and what I hear, and maybe it's, my own echo chamber, but we keep trying, even arguing amongst ourselves, among the most intolerant and virulent amongst us. But I don't see that happening anywhere else. And so I'm trying to wrap my head around how we in the diaspora, as well as we who are living in Israel, can have our voices heard better, and also apply a sense of urgency in the communities that care about Palestinians to demand that they also work toward peace.
So
And yeah,
let me
sorry,
answer
I'll
that
leave it.
because I don't think the efforts of organizations, individuals, when I say working at the edges, I don't mean the edges of our society working towards it. I mean the government, and a government policy has to work towards the edges. Things like water, give them a lot more water. Create a ward in one of our hospitals, especially to deal with, to provide extra care for Palestinians. I mean, I don't know. There are lots of, the beach is one of the things I mentioned. Figuring out a way for them to use Ben Gurion Airport to come and go from the West Bank instead of what they have to do. I mean, it's not easy. There are all sorts of logistics problems, but I'm talking about things that the government of Israel can do to make their lives better. I don't mean this week, obviously, and not in the middle of the war, but in terms of a medium-term plan, things that we can do in the medium term to improve their lives, that is coming from the government of Israel, not from a bunch of, well-meaning Israelis who have
No, but
minimal.
sorry to interrupt you, but that's, and I appreciate what you're saying, that that would be almost at a policy level, in a project level, but that's top down. And because governments change, and because the people who are voting for the Israeli government are so split among themselves, we are struggling with that. There will be people who will be very angry to do that sort of thing at a governmental level, and if it's not organic from the ground up, and that the government becomes to reflect that portion of people rather than top down, I don't see how that can ever take root if people are so divided in the citizen environment. And just getting back to what my bigger question was, is that we are wringing our hands trying to figure out how to be more giving so that we can be living in a state of peace. And we argue amongst ourselves, even in the gentlest of ways. And I'm wondering where that pressure is internally and externally, among the Palestinians, and perhaps more broadly, 2 billion Muslims. I keep looking for that, and I'm missing it.
You're missing it because it doesn't. Amongst the 2 billion Muslims, it might exist in some areas. Clearly, there are parts of the Muslim world that are willing to live in peace with Israel. Amongst the Palestinians, as long as they dream of returning to their homes and wherever in Jaffa or the villages that don't exist, they're not ready. They're not ready psychologically. They're not ready in any which way to accept the fact that a Palestinian state will be a state that's smaller than all of Palestine. Look, that has been our history. It's been our history from the very beginning. In 1947, if the Palestinians had accepted the partition plan, who knows what our lives would have been very, very different. None of these wars would have taken place, and everything would have been very, very different in history. But that was the history that was chosen. Until there can be that fundamental change, I don't see where we reach. All the little things that people do, I don't think has much of an impact. It's all good and well, but we saw the people who were picking up Palestinians at the border and taking them to the hospitals being slaughtered on October 7th. So I don't see it making that any significant difference. I think governmental policies will not solve the problem, the governmental policies will only work at the edges, will only improve things at the edges, will only improve the chances for another generation down for things to change. But you're right. I don't know which Israeli government is going to do that. I don't think some of the things are that controversial, and some of them are. When I was the Palestinians, I would be, screaming about water rights and not screaming about things that they're not going to get. But again, these are the things that that might take place. I don't know. Michael Ader. No. Okay. Nancy Kaplan.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hit the unmute on time. You want me to wait my turn, or should I speak now?
Say, ready to go on.
All right. Yes, I hit it 3 times before it worked. It's a small issue anyway, but Sinwar, when he was not hiding underground, bunkered away, had a reputation of murdering anyone he thought was treasonous to the Palestinian cause, somewhat like Mr. Putin. Do they have a setup like the Stasi in East Germany, where people spy on one another and kill them off if, God forbid, they say anything good about Israel?
Yep, they absolutely do. I don't know if it's as efficient as the Stasi. I mean, Germans are very efficient at that over generations, but they clearly do. And people have been killed who've expressed anything else. So I don't see, it's a real problem. There's no question about it. It is where it is. I mean, look, I wish I could be optimistic in some aspect, in some direction, but I was a pessimist before this war. At this point, I'm even more pessimistic, to say the least. So, Nancy.
Hi,
Thank
thanks.
you.
By the way, for those who don't know, Sinwar was in Israeli jail in the first place, not because he killed Israelis, but because he murdered collaborators within the Palestinian community. He was one of their enforcers, and that's how he ended up in jail. And that's probably one reason he was allowed out in the Shalit deal, was he had not killed Israelis. So anyway, I had 2 questions, Mark, about factors that are currently percolating that involve a lot of domestic politics, but could also affect the larger situation. One is the Ramadan angle regarding Al-Aqsa and what might happen there when you've got like pyromaniacs on both sides trying to start trouble. And the other is the Haredi draft exemption situation, which is also moving under a legal deadline in a way that might destabilize the coalition. So I wondered what your thoughts were.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought up the Haredi, because I was planning to talk about that, but I didn't get to it. So let's start with the first one, though. I do not think that Netanyahu is going to go along with what Ben Gvir wants, certainly relating to Arab Israelis. He was told basically it's illegal. There's no basis to limit Arab Israelis from going to Al-Aqsa during the Ramadan. They are full citizens of Israel. They have full rights. There's absolutely no legal basis. It may not stop the Israeli police sometimes, but I don't think so. I don't think Netanyahu is going to give in there, and he certainly doesn't want a new front when it comes to that. He might give in, but I don't think Ben Gvir is going to leave the government over this, to say the least. The Haredim and the draft, that's a real time bomb. Particularly after Gallant basically said he won't agree to any deal that basically Gantz and Eisenkotz will agree to. He, as defense minister, won't present, because the defense minister has to present the chok that's coming from. It's a change in the national security law, basically, and so he has to present it. He won't present it unless. Now, obviously, Netanyahu could fire Gallant, which again will end up with millions on the street, especially if it ends up to be over the issue of Haredi draft. The Haredim have a real problem because it can't be pushed off anymore. The Supreme Court has made it clear it can't be pushed off anymore. And without a new draft law, it's not so much the fear that tomorrow morning they're going to come up and round up all the Haredim and send them to either jail or to Bakum to be drafted. It's that if they don't officially have an exemption, the government can no longer pay them. Now, Smotrich said, I'm going to pass a law to allow us to pay them even if it doesn't happen. I think you'll have a hard time getting that passed, even even in the coalition, to get a law like that passed. And it'll also bring people out to the streets in numbers you can't believe. I don't think the ultra-Orthodox really understand what's going on in the society, based on the war and also based on the new draft law that was proposed that increased the time that regular soldiers had to serve and increased the number of days drastically that reservists would serve every year. The Army needs more people, there's no question about that, but they went to the easiest solution: take those that are already serving, and the country and those who serve are up in arms over that, unless you touch the people who are not serving. So I think if anything's going to blow up this government and force new elections, it's going to be that. I actually saw an interesting piece today by one of, I think it was Nadav Ayal who wrote this, that it's even more interesting because the only thing that would keep the money coming to the Haredim in these circumstances is the call for new elections. So if there's new elections, there would be an excuse for why they can't pass a law, and it'll put everything off for 6 months or 9 months. So suddenly you have a reason why the Haredim might be willing to roll the dice and hope they can make up a deal with the new government, whatever it might be, and go and support new elections. So this issue is the single biggest issue that is likely impossible to bring about elections. So we can only hope. What can I tell you? It's very difficult to have a government which has so little support in the country, and a situation where everybody is concerned that every decision that Netanyahu is making is being made for his political considerations and not for the considerations of the good of the country. I'm sure it's not 100% that way, but there's a high percentage of that any decision relates to that, and people are very concerned about that. So I don't know how much further that can go on. Okay, we've reached 7 o'clock. I want to thank everybody. I hope you're all going to subscribe on the paid side, and we'll meet again in 2 weeks, unless a miracle occurs and peace breaks out, in which case I'll have less frequent, but I'll keep on having Zoom sessions. Have a good evening or good day, everybody.